Hey, this is Karl from the Gates of Slumber, and you're watching Richard Metal Fan.
Hey, what's up, guys? Episode 302 of Richard Metal Fan Interviews, calling from Zoom, and I'm here with Karl Simon from the Gates of
Fine.
Slumber. So, how are you doing today, man? It's so great to be able to talk with you today.
Doing fine. How's it going?
Not too bad, not too bad. It's a great afternoon. I'm ready to talk with you today.
Nice.
Hell yeah. So kind of what I want to talk about is of course I want to talk about the new Gates of Slumber album, but I also want to talk about like your musical history and sort of do a rundown of your discography. So to get back to young Carl Simmons, so kind of growing up, what were the first bands that got you into metal? What made you want to be a vocalist and guitarist?
First bands that got me into metal, Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Motorhead, Metallica. I was a kid of the 80s, so that was all stuff that when I was, 12, 13, 14, 15, Slayer, Testament, saw Testament a bunch of times back then. Um, yeah. And then as far as like wanting to be in a band, that was something I think that was just like a kid dream back, when I was a young kid wanting to do it, dreaming about it, writing, stupid lyrics as you do when you're like 12, 13-year-old kid. And then, the 90s rolled around, taste changed, started to get introduced as you age, you get introduced, you meet new people, new experiences, new music, got into, punk rock and hardcore, and that was a lot more accessible. Got involved, met, Jason McCash right about the time of being 19 years old. We started, punk bands and shit like that. And Chuck Brown, knew him. Uh, we had actually worked on kind of more of a rock and roll type of thing round about 1993. 93, 94 was very pivotal as far as music goes. I was working at a pizzeria here in town, and Chuck, I'd been in high school with him. I hadn't seen anybody for a long time. I'd just been kind of working this job, and I wasn't having the best time. I was throughout my life. I've had several bouts of like really severe dissociative depression, and right out of high school was one of those. I wasn't doing well at all. But going to work, not looking forward to too much, not inspired by anything. And Chuck comes in, and we're talking about music and stuff like that, and he had a copy of The Obsessed Church Within on cassette, and he was like, "You got to hear this, fucking great, it's the best shit ever." And yeah, that opened the door. And that was kind of the beginning of like, that's the kind of music we want to do, but we're not really good enough to do it. And I was still very much into like punk and hardcore as well. And that's more, not that there's no talent in punk and hardcore. It's a fucking the speed picking, and I'm not trying to say, it's just when you're trying to play like Deep Purple and you don't know what you're doing, you're going to start off with the Ramones. You know what I mean? That's where I'm coming from with that. And so we got our little little punk bands going, and I won't waste too much time on that. Um, it eventually that all kind of fell apart, and ended up hanging out with Chuck again because Chuck had like split away, and as you do when you're young, things kind of come and go. And we got back together, and we started a band. Like, we were like thinking, should we do this, do another punk band or something like that? And I was like, why don't we go back and try to revisit that rock and roll stuff we were doing, like the heavy rock, heavy metal, like not heavy metal in the sense of like death metal or like technical thrash, but like the Obsessed, like fucking the prototype of heavy metal. Um, so we had this band called The Keep, and I was playing bass and kind of learning on the job, and Jason was kind of out of like, he had been like doing some punk rock stuff, but he wasn't playing. He had just had his first kid, gotten, I think he was married at the time. He's just newly married, but he still wanted to keep playing, and we're all doing our little thing. So he joined, and we banged around for a few years to keep. Jason, he kind of split away, went to do another thing, and yeah, we kind of messed around for another couple years and never really did anything. Um, and yeah, eventually that fell apart, and I made the switch from bass. Like, I never really developed as a bass player much. It was always like,
Yeah, so
you know,
like guitar is like your main forte.
Yeah, and everybody says that like, oh, bass is the easiest. It's like, I mean, well, things are as hard as you really want to make them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, pretty much.
You get put in. I've milked power chords and the pentatonic scale for quite some time now, and here we are fucking talking about it. But I mean, you always want to grow as a player, and that's kind of where I am at now in my life, is really wanting to kind of bust out of that. But that being said, it's still a hell of a lot of fun to just turn up the amps and just smash away on some riffs. And that was what the Gates of Slumber started out as. Like the
Yeah.
idea, like around about 1996, I was just like, because the Keep was like, I had this vision of the Keep kind of being like a more primitive Count Raven kind of thing in my head, because I just newly like, you know, was going to college, and there was the internet lab that you could go to, and of course, rather than doing my fucking homework, I'm looking up German doom metal bands, and fucking, because I knew that the scene was happening there. Like, in the Obsessed like liner notes, he thanks all these bands, and I was just like, if these guys are able, the Obsessed are good, their friends got to be good, because that was back how I did things when I was a kid. That's how kind of how I got turned on to the Misfits. Metallica wore their T-shirts and stupid shit like that you've heard a million times, but it's true. Um, so tracked down all the usual suspects, and those usual suspects led to other things, and I, picked up on some of these, things that were going on at Hellhound, and like, whatever kind of, you know, just got exposed to it and misused the internet at college, where I was failing as a student, to get turned on to this stuff. But my conception of what we were doing, the little band called The Keep, was that it was more of a primitive, like kind of doomy thing. And Chuck was wanting to move more into, you know, more musical stuff. Not that there's nothing not musical about Count Raven. I'm not trying to say that, but like those big, dun, Celtic Frost, I saw it more dark and metal, and Chuck was like more not afraid to be a little lighter in the tonalities and what he was going for, and maybe more kind of along the lines of like what was popular at the time. Like, what my original conception of Gates of Slumber was very much like every song kind of sounding like fucking Dawn of Megiddo. You know what I mean? Like the heavy
Yeah.
dude off like the Megatherian, with like the occasional like like fast slow breakout. Like I've Cyanide, the death metal giants out of Chicago. You
Yeah,
know,
that's where you got the band name from.
yeah, is like wanting to take like that abominable heaviness, and and just make something kind of like hybridized with like Saint Vitus and all this stuff, but definitely borrowing more of the dark. Like there was all kinds of shit. Like wanted to create like a full like leather studded sleeve and kind of cop like the Alice Cooper makeup as a nod to like what Tom Warrior did with Frost, because they've always been a huge fucking influence to me. Like I love all of Celtic Frost. Really, it's you
Yeah,
know
same for me.
yeah.
But like those first couple of albums are just peak, like To Make a Theory and Morbid
Yeah,
Tales and shit like that.
I appreciate everything that they've done. I mean, I'm not like, it's sad. I just haven't connected with like Monotheist and stuff like that, like the comeback stuff. I just haven't like connected with, not like I did. Like To Megatherion was like my first extreme metal purchase back in like the like 87. I can't remember. It was like the Noise cassette tape, and went to Coconuts Music at the mall, and I was definitely, judge books by their cover. That's how I like cool covers, and that cover was just like something was fucked about it, and I bought it, and it's fuck.
But tell me about like those like first couple like Gates of Slumber demos being Blood Encrusted Death Axe, Sabbath Witch, and The Cloaked Figure. I thought those were like really raw sounding demos. Where were those recorded at?
So Jamie Walters, a buddy of mine, I was living in Cleveland when we did the Blood Encrusted Death Axe demo. I had like nobody. I was doing like minor shows out of a place called the Melody Inn here in Indianapolis at the time. Like I had like this great heavy rock band Boulder, Nine Shocks Terror. They just completely blew the doors out of the place to like three people on like a Thursday night. I paid them out of pocket, and you know, I it, I felt like Cleveland was like kind of more like what I was trying to do than what Indianapolis was at that time. So I moved away for a year. This is 2000, and I tried to find some people to play with. Played with some amazing musicians, but they were all, when you move to a new town. I learned this in that experience. It's like if you pick up and move somewhere, everybody knows everybody, and there's known some, and they know if they're in a band right now and they're serious players, and they've got like a short list in their head of, I could jam with this so and so and so and so, and if this was the, everybody's kind of, they know the pool, the boneyard where they're going to pull from. So if they're trying to put a new band together, they're not going to take, not necessarily going to take a chance on the fucking weirdo from out of town when they know 20 guys who are better than that guy. And they were, I've been faking it for
Yeah.
so, it's like, so, Jamie Walters, who is the singer bass player of Boulder, was like, he was like my buddy, we hung out, and he was like, towards the end of my year there, it was kind of wrapping up, like, 9/11 had happened and things were changing, and I I wanted to go back to school. I wanted, kind of do something different with my life. So I was going to go back to school and give it a good try, and Cleveland was just, it kind of going into the rear view, but he's like, let's fucking at least record this stuff. So, he recorded it, and it never really got released or anything like that. It just was kind of there. Never tried to push it because there was no band. It's like, it's there. The stuff was at least archived so that I could, say, hey, there's this. And then, moved back home, went to school for a little bit. And about 2000, about a year goes by, and meet up with Chris Gordon. And had been playing in Devil to Pay. He and Steve, had started Devil to Pay around about this time. And Chuck had to keep going with other dudes. I was just like, well, fuck, let's give it a shot here, trying to, I just met Chris, and we got together, and there was a dude named Brad who I posted on like some local internet, like, musician seeking musician, because this was the dawn of like cyberspace was new. It's like there was no longer like the local recycler mag or whatever, where they'd be like, looking for lead singer, no dicks, fucking the one at ad. That was how it was, man. Like, you had Metal Maniacs in the 90s, and it was like seeking pen pals into King Diamond, Merciful Fate, Satanism, Light S&M, Red Wine. You'd see these things in the back of the fucking books.
Yeah.
But yeah, the internet was kind of taking that over, and I'd met Brad, and we, got together and did the Sabbath Witch demo, and we did spread.
I love that demo too.
Yeah, it was a great sound.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because there's like a third song was called the Jury was recorded, but during that time, but it was not included. I was curious what the reason for that.
It was incomplete.
Yeah,
it was like the Jury, I think, had been recorded a few times. It was just trying to get that. That was like, I think, as primitive as it is, it was like a beginning of an attempt to be a little bit more grandiose in songwriting, rather than, the Judge is fairly simple. There's the theme, there's the verse, there's a solo. And actually, that solo was like the first thing that I ever like really mapped out well, is that little solo section there. I used to spend a lot of time like looking at the in fact, funny joke, like when I went back to school at that time, I was a psychology major, and I had a music minor because I still love music and I wanted to know about it. So, I was in college for a couple, 2-3 semesters, and I took that theory to heart, and I used it to try. I mean, not that it shows, it's still primitive as hell, but I used it to try to figure out this unknown language, which, if you don't know anything about it, if you're just like a dude who picks up a fucking guitar, you've got a brain the size of a fucking walnut. It's like everything I learned was like, the heavy, like the beginning of like Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, it's like, and I was trying to flesh it out because there's more to it. There's way more to it. Like if it's just it's not satisfying. Like, you want to be able to emote on multiple levels musically. And even way back then, I knew that was ultimately what I wanted to do is be able to be more versatile as a player. But I'm lazy, and I'm lazy, and I learn by doing. I can't like I learn by doing. That's just how I've always been. Um, but yeah, it's like so the jury was kind of trying to do more compositionally than some of the other songs maybe at the time for me personally. Like Jason, when he had so yeah, that lineup of the band, we played shows and eventually it broke up. Brad and I, Chris had left. Brad and I were there, and like Chuck and I had, we'd always kind of butt heads. That was a recurring theme in our relationship. We just butted heads, and looking back on it now, it's also goddamn stupid. With
Yeah.
it long view and hindsight, it's like all of our arguments were so fucking dumb, just pointless arguments. But it's the path you end up taking. Anyway, I had always Chuck and I had like talked and made up, and we were buddies again. And I was like, well, if anything ever changed, man, I'm gonna give you a call. And Chris had left at the beginning of we had just gotten booked. John Gallo of Wardruin had done Born Too Late Fest. I think it was like the first or second one up in Rochester, New York. And he wanted us to play. And I was like, yeah, this is fucking great. We're going to get to play with like fucking, While Heaven Wept and just a ton of bands. And, Chris, for some reason, he left. He left the group like on the cusp of going, and Chuck jumped in, learned the set, and we went up there, had a great show. Great time, met a bunch of fucking amazing people, and that was it. That was the beginning of stuff. Brad left a little while after that. He just kind of wanted to go in a different direction. He didn't want to do exactly what we were doing, because Chuck and I had like this vision that had kind of formed around Gates of Slumber, because he saw what I was trying to go for finally, and it resonated with parts of him. So he like boom, got into it, and we had this plan, and Brad stepped out, and Jason, as he'd been off doing this grind band called Burn It Down. God, I was about to say The Dream Is Dead, which was no, it was The Dream Is Dead. He'd done Burn It Down earlier. It was The Dream Is Dead. Oh, fuck, this is a long time ago. But yeah, he had been in the grind band The Dream Is Dead, and he had to step away from that, but he didn't want to stop playing. We were not going to be touring at the level that they were, if at all. I was still going to college, and Chuck, was a new father. Jason's a father. It's like this was like kind of a slow like kind of thing that we were looking at. But yeah, he stepped right in and learned all the material, helped flesh things out, started writing songs, because he was already a very, very like well-versed musician who could get things done, and when Jason hit the ground, he had three people who could write songs, and we started cranking shit out.
Yeah. Yeah, and then of course, you eventually played around. You did that last demo, the Cloak Figure, and then you got signed to your first label, Final Chapter Records, which is, I believe, in Belgium. So, how did they find the Gates of Slumber?
God, the internet forums. It was like there was like doommetal.com, there was the Miskatonic forum, there was hellridemusic.com, stonerrock.com, all these forum boards that existed where you could just share shit. It was way cooler than fucking social media. Like when everything moved to like MySpace and Facebook and fucking all these fucking other platforms, it just sucked. The forum boards were a hell of a lot more fun. But then, fuck, back then I barely understood the fucking internet. I still don't understand it, but I have a different relationship with it than I did back then. I didn't know, you just didn't give a shit. You're just young and most of the time drunk and just having a good time, and nothing was serious. But yeah, Final Chapter got our music. I'd put the Sabbath Witch, not the Sabbath Witch. I did put that up on what was it? Sound, not SoundCloud. What was it called? It was like one of the very first like MP3, like it was like Bandcamp's like great
Yeah,
grandma.
I'm like I have no idea.
I
Yeah,
can't
I'm sort of like a late bloomer to social media myself. I didn't have any until 2011.
Oh, that's good. That's really good. It's not. This was like 2003. I want to say like SoundLink or something like that. But it was widely used. You could upload an MP3 and you had a little picture. You could put the album cover up and you could stream it basically. It would take forever to buffer because, it was slow back then. But once it buffered through, you could play the whole song and, you could post it to like a forum board. Basically, you could get on doommetal.com or Hellride and be like, check out the new demo. And I just did that, and I was like a poster, like, with my stupid fucking opinions on like, fucking Iron Man is the greatest doom metal band alive and Al Morris is the shit. Like saying, it was basically being an idiot on the internet with this band. And one day I finally was like, oh, share my demo, and then put that up and you know, people started listening. And then, fucking Frederick from Final Chapter, he offered us he was like, yeah, I want to do a record. It's like, it was a press and distribute thing. So we had to pay for the recording. But he was going to press it and distribute it. And we had the contract, and like line 11 was like blank for like artist demands. And I put in label must make good faith effort to bring band over to Europe to tour to support record. And this was all very calculated on my part because, like I said earlier, is like I'd spent all that time in the 90s and I saw that there was like a thriving community for doom metal that existed in Europe, in like Germany and Holland and Scandinavia, England, fucking, it was there. There was a thing that was happening. And like, you knew that like, the Obsessed was going to Europe. You knew fucking St. Vitus was going to Europe. This was like stuff that you could be aware of if you read just like a little bit of stuff. And I knew that that was where to go, because at the time, like, America was just not wanting what that thing that I didn't feel, not in the same way that, they would later. It was more like late 90s, early 2000s was like death metal was still king, black metal was fucking king, there was the beginning of like the power metal resurgence was starting to happen. Metal was, it was still around, but the big players were like, death metal and fucking black metal bands. And like, fuck, I like that shit well enough, but to me, it's just not the same. It's like my shit is doom. That's what
Yeah.
sparks me. So yeah, I knew that getting over there, like putting a record out over there and getting over there was that was what, if, why, and, this was what kind of split up like Brad, like in particular, was like, why are we driving like 15, 16 hours to go to Rochester, New York to play a show for basically no money when we could like do cover tunes and drive like 10 miles? And, that was where he was. He didn't like, he liked the music, but he didn't see why anybody would drive, like would do that. And you do it because you love it and because you're trying to,
And for passion.
yeah, yeah. It's making music for a passion, not for any kind of monetary gain. And that was what it was 100% back then, 100%. And it's like, you know, but the reality of the situation is you need the fucking shit because you, intensity and passion do not fucking get you to the next city.
Yeah, exactly. But tell me about making like the first album, The Awakening. So what was sort of like the whole writing and recording process like for the debut full-length Gates of Slumber album?
Well, those songs were all songs that I had written between like 1998 and things that I had worked on for a very, very long time, like The Judge, the beginning of The Jury. The beginning of The Jury I kind of worked on and really started developing 99 2000. But there was The Judge. There was actually off of the new record, the intro riff to The Plague was written around that time. That's that stuff has been there for since the beginning of the band. Off of Like a Plague Upon the Land, Dweller in the Deep, that it's like a riff in the before the verse. It's the second like hook riff in the song. I'd had that from the Keep days. That had been around for the longest fucking time. Little riffs and just putting things together slowly but surely. And I cobbled in, like, I had the judge, I had the jury, there's the executioner. Those are those three. God, what all the others were on there? Jason wrote Broken on the Wheel and brought that in. Chuck had The Burial. And then Jason, yeah, that's it. I think we had all worked on the Cloak Figure together. That was a special song. I really wish that we had done that more. I always really, really, really wanted to work together on songs. Like, here, I have this riff, help me take it somewhere else. And we did that sometimes, but I wanted that to be every song. Like, yeah. I was really inspired. There was that old there was that old VHS tape from the fucking 80s, The Ultimate Revenge, of like it was like Venom, Slayer, and Exodus, and like there was like live footage of like Exodus and Slayer from like Studio 54 in New York City, and there was like other video performances of Venom, who had also, I guess, played that night, but for whatever reason they didn't use any of the footage. I don't know, or maybe they weren't. But there was the interview bit with Venom where Kronos was talking about how basically Venom was the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. And that to me encapsulates, like, I think all of my favorite bands of any genre. It's like fucking Bolt Thrower. It's like, we were just fucking talking about this at goddamn band practice the last time we had a chance to have it. And it was like how fucking Bolt Thrower is just such an organic monster of a band. And it's just like, there is no, I like, if you're going to have a band of standouts, I would like it to be a band of all standouts. And if you're not going to have a band of all standouts, then I definitely would like a Celtic Frost or the Ramones, where everybody is in concert and it is like a fucking Tank Division, and you take one element out and it falls apart. That's how I view bands and stuff like that. But getting back to the Awakening, it's like we just had those songs and we were on a fucking rip. Like, Jason and Chuck both worked like second shift, third shift jobs. I worked a second shift job, and we got together like 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We got together at Chuck's parents' house in a fucking like storage shed that was converted into the rehearsal room, the red shed. And we on a fucking schedule. Like, we had a writing day, we had a jamming day, and we had a rehearsing day to do everything, and we pounded through it for 2 or 3 years like that. Like, once the band got settled in, I think like 2002, 2003, we fell in, and I think we had like 52 times 3, 150 practices.
Which is crazy. But this year does also mark 20 years of the Awakening. So how do you feel about the album now, 20 years later?
I love it. I absolutely love it. Like, recording it, we recorded it at can't remember the name of the studio off the top of my head, but we recorded it with Mike Doughton, our very, very good dear friend Mike Doughton, who had, he had been recording. He did the Cloak Figure demo too, which actually I like that, the sound on that. I wish we had just kind of cut and paste that sound, but the idea was to go bigger and better and different. And I remember one of the big things I was really into, like, I was always flip-flopping amps around, and at that point I'd had a Marshall 1959 Plexi, which was way too much amp for a fucking moron like myself. If I had brains, I'd still have that amp. I would have kept it, and instead of channel jumping it and cranking it like a meathead, I would have just got a really class distortion pedal and used it as the perfect pedal platform to, like, because it was just such a monster beautiful amp. And I had a Laney clip too that the guys Noradruin had sold me. It actually belonged to the new wave of British heavy metal band Demon. Demon was written on the side of it. It was an eBay purchase. And I had those two amps, and that was going to be the core of the sound for the Awakening. But we turned, to start going to get the sounds, and there was something wrong with the clip, and it was pulling in like radio frequencies and shit like that. So the idea was scrapped, and like we spent like a couple, like too long for the record, too long with the budget we had trying to get a tone. And eventually, Mike just like, fuck this. These are great amps, but we're not using them. We're going to use he had a fucking Steve Vai Carvin, one of the original Steve Vai signatures by Carvin. And I wish I'd bought one of those because I love the guitar sound.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of South Heaven a little bit.
Yeah. And then next album is Suffer No Guilt. I thought that was a good follow-up to The Awakening, because usually with the debut album, you have like your entire life to write, and there's a lot of hype with the first album. When it came to making Suffer No Guilt, did you feel pressure to follow up The Awakening?
Yeah, but actually, there's one that you're missing. Like a Plague Upon the Land came between that. That's the lost record. It's that was a record that we released on Hellride Music. Chris Barnes, our good friend, put it out, and it's limited to like 1,000 copies. But that was it was an EP, but it was actually longer than The Awakening. So we had done that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And actually, we may be digging that one out of the tomb to re-release. So we're working on that. So you're hearing it here first. We're thinking and working on
An
that.
exclusive, folks.
It's your first people to hear about it. Like we're looking at it seriously, and I'm excited about it because I love that. See, that was a bad interpersonal time, like the pressures, because we went and did that European tour, and it was like that changed my life. That changed my fucking life because personally, I was in a lot of the disaster area at that time, and being able to do that and have that experience, I was just like, fuck, yeah, this is what I got to do. And Jason, he had been in touring bands before, so he got the bug too. Chuck was a new father. It created a lot of stress, and unfortunately, we split up. And that's what brings us to Suffer No Guilt. Chris Gordon, who had done the Sabbath Witch demo, came back into the band. We had auditioned several people, but Chris had the fucking passion, like he was just beating on those fucking toms. And we were like, yeah, this is it. He's got some fire. But he couldn't play double kicks. So like the Awakening was gone. We couldn't touch the Awakening anymore. But we were all like Jason and me, we were already kind of looking to different things than just like Saint Vitus and the usual suspects. We were looking at like bands like Manila Road, Sirathungol. We were on a huge fucking Rainbow kick. Like I think I must have listened to fucking Stargazer like 7,000 times during those years. It was like, because our routine was like when we were practicing with Chris, like I'd drive actually, and Bob later, it got to the point where after we were no longer with Chuck, we were practicing in the evenings or whenever we could. Sometimes it was afternoon practices, but I'd swing by and pick Jason up in the van like the Sweet Pickles fucking bus. He'd pile into it. We'd listen to fucking, there was a lot of Count Raven, always been a lot of Count Raven. Probably a band that I don't mention enough as like a deep fucking influence to me is Count Raven. And Internal Void too. Like there was a lot of Internal Void, a lot of Count Raven. Sirathungol's fucking
Another underrated band.
Yeah, fuck, man. You can't say enough about him. Like, fucking King of the it's so fucking integral. Manila, like early Manila Road, like even before like like Crystal Logic and stuff like that, like Metal and Invasion to me, like as primitive as that is just fucking dig it. There's just power, and Mark was just such a fucking god player, just a god.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were trying to like bring that into the Doom thing that we had done. And Jason was writing a lot more. Like he was just like cranking out material. And we re-recorded the version of Dweller in the Deep that you hear, that's a re-record. The original version is on like a Plague Upon the Land. That was actually a Chuck Brown song that we re-recorded for the second record. And to that one, I brought Angel of Death, Suffer No Guilt. And I think those are the two that I brought in as
Yeah.
far as like, there's a lot of filler on that record. And I
And
look
some of
back,
them are kind of like interludes, like Gemini and even Children of the Night.
Children, I like Gemini quite a lot. Like um, that song. So Jason wrote that bass riff one night when we were fucking hanging out at his place, smashing beers and watching movies and stuff like that. And his son was, can't remember how old he was, but he was like maybe 8 or 9 years old, and we're just fucking hanging out watching fucking Conan the Barbarian, because there was like a big resurgence. There had been like a re-release of the DVDs, and like Mardo had like done a whole thing of collectible shits that came out around about that time. So there was like, and there was the represses of like Solomon Kane, and like Howard's books were getting like a big push at that point. So it was just everywhere. And, we were fucking hanging out and, talking about what, I had like the riff to Suffer No Guilt. And I was just like, man, let's fucking, like, there's bands that sing about fucking weed. There's bands that sing about X, Y, and Z and A, B, and C. So it's like, let's fucking kind of do like a Howard thing on this record. Let's, it's not a true concept record because it's like, it doesn't really fit in, but like his song Riders of Doom, which, is basically like his treatment of Basil Poledouris's Riders of Doom. Like he took that scene from the movie and put it on mute and basically watched it over and over again and worked out Riders of Doom. And
Yeah.
I wrote words, and when he let me know what he was doing, I was just like, yes, 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 yes. I will sit and I will write words to this scene, and that is this.
Yeah. And I also like the last song on the album, Woe is Kings, which has samples from Conan the Barbarian. Were you guys like fans of that movie at the time?
Oh fuck. Yeah, I mean, so Chris Gordon titled the record because he was there too. It's like we were all fucking hanging out doing this shit, and it was cool because again, we were kind of at that time we were like a unit. It was a new like triumvirate had kind of formed, like with a hive mind, and that's that mindset that you want in a band to a degree, where you're like, you're a tribe, you're a gang, you're a group, you're a band. Like Motorhead, like you can tell, you could, that's, like the Eddie Clark's famous story about when he got the job in Motorhead. Lemmy shows up, hands him the bullet belt and the jacket at 7 a.m, says, "You're fucking in the band." Yeah.
Easy gig ever.
Yeah, exactly. You're jumped into the fucking gang, bro. So, like, we're sitting there, like, talking about like lyrical ideas and shit. And like, we had a lot of the music together. And like, Chris out of the blue is like, let's call the record Suffer No Guilt. Because like on the documentary that came with the re-release of the DVD, like written on Conan's father's sword, if you turn it the right way, it says Suffer No Guilt, he who wield this in the name of Crom. And it's just like, this is little touches for the production of the film, but Chris like had kind of shoved that in the mental Rolodex and pulled out at just the right minute. It's like, well, god damn it, you just fucking gone and done name the record. So that was cool. And yeah, he named the record. We were just putting the songs together about it was a huge influence. The movie, the books, the whole atmosphere, it really came together. My only regrets about Suffer No Guilt are the fat on the record, because it didn't need to be as long as it was. It was needlessly long. Like Gemini, though, it has a soft spot in my heart and always will, because we were sitting there, hanging out, and Jason was like working that riff, and he was like, kind of wanted to do something like he had done on the first record. I can't remember the name of the cut right now. But we're sitting there, and like Jason's son, like was, he's a young kid, and we're just hanging out with him. Like I asked the kid, I'm like, what do you think of that? He's like, oh, I like that a lot. And then it's like, well, what do you want to name it? And their dog's name was Gemini. Then he's like, let's name it Gemini. And I was like, well, that's done. That's another fucking title in the book.
Yeah.
Sorry
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, it's all good, but still want to move on. I want to talk about the next album, Conqueror. I thought that was a great album, especially like I love the Dark Valley Suite, which in my opinion, I consider it a masterpiece in the Gates of Slumber catalog. So tell me about making the Conqueror album.
Well, Chris was out. Bob Fouts stepped in, started touring with us, and Jason and Bob had worked together before, and really the songs like we there was a couple maybe a year and a half of writing before we got into pre-production, and then not near enough time in pre-production for my taste. Um, but that's what it was. That's how we worked. We worked fast. Yeah, fucking Dark Valley, man. So that's basically based on the book Dark Valley Destiny by L. Sprague de Camp. Basically, I can't remember if it's authorized. Well, I mean, I don't know if the Howard Estate has any powers to authorize, but it's a biography that he did, detailing the oddities and difference, the weirdness of Howard. And I took like reading the book, like he used to drive around with a gun in his glove box, and he had enemies, people he knew he was his enemies. So I basically it started to dawn on me that it was quite possible that Howard had a little bit of schizophrenia, and perhaps like the Hyborian world kind of lived at the periphery of his vision, and that reality and fantasy kind of blended together. I feel for him like he was in touch with more creative shit than most people don't think and live like that. They're very, very mundane. He was not a mundane person. He was like gifted, and not run of the mill at all. And that's basically about him, about him. And then the rest of the song, of course, is instrumental. And there's the lines written, I can't remember exactly the full title, but we took his poem and put it to weird guitar shit. I really, really enjoyed the writing process of that record. I just wish that we'd had like another 6 months to let things go. And I really wish that somebody had fucking told me to try to just sing it in a lower register, because there's some pitchy vocals on there. That's my fault. The ego problem, you know what I mean? But
Yeah, and then the next album, Hymns of Blood and Thunder, I thought was good. It was like a quick turnaround from Conqueror since Hymns of Blood and Thunder was released a year after. Did you start writing for that right after Conqueror came out?
Hymns of Blood and Thunder is Jason McCash's record. Really,
Oh.
that is like those songs are 100% Jason McCash. Like I did like Chaos Calling and Death Dealer on that, and those are very much run of the mill. Um, I they're not bad songs.
But they are bangers though. I love those songs.
Yeah, they're bangers, and that was what I was going for, because Jason's material on that was so fucking sprawling. And again, that's another one that I really wish that we had taken the time, slowed down. But we were on I Hate Records, and then we got signed to Rise Above and Strike While the Iron's Hot. And Jason had these songs, and he was just fuck. And there's like little fucking splits and this and that, and these little compilations that like we did like so much shit. He was just so driven to put out as much as possible. And yeah, that was like I very seldom listen to those records. I very seldom go back and listen to anything. Like recently, within the last 6 months, I went and listened to Descent into Madness again, because I remembered really, really loving that song. And I'd forgotten about like the solo section on that. I was trying to go for like, touches of David Gilmour and shit like that in the solo, and like Sanford's fucking synths on that. It's like if we had just, taken more time instead of being at a breakneck pace the whole fucking time, we could have developed it up more. And when you let things breathe, they can grow. And that was one of the biggest problems, I think, with the Gates of Slumber. And it was really my fucking buddy Jason, he never let shit breathe. He was just like, yeah, yeah, you can play that song Hold On Loosely.
Yeah.
Like my special. That motherfucker needed to listen to that song. It's just like, because he was just driving so hard all the time. And it broke people. It broke people.
Yeah.
Couldn't keep up with it. And yeah, like, so, like, my relationship with Hymns of Blood and Thunder is so distant because it's so much him. Like that Doom of Akla Damus song, I think, like, he wrote the words to it. And that was the beginning of Jason starting to write lyrics, because I was just sitting there like, man, I don't know what to fucking write about. Like the Conan lyrics ran out with Conqueror. Like, like I was just like, we've done this. It's like, we got to do something different. So he was writing those songs. It's all very personal to him. I'm sorry if I'm rambling again.
Hey, I kind of like it. Like it's kind of weird if you ever do an interview if I did and you're already on like 2 minutes in, you're already on your fifth, sixth question.
Yeah, I just I can rant. I can
Yeah,
really,
and these are one of those interviews where I'm just like I just listen.
well, if I'm running my mouth
Hey,
about,
hey, you're good, man. I'm not complaining. But going into the last album, The Wretch, before the breakup, I thought that was a pretty good album. So what was that whole album like?
so that was, as much as um Hymns of Blood and Thunder was Jason's record, I feel like The Wretch was my record. Um, we had split up with Bob. He was just not satisfied with anything that was going on in the band and had made that clear multiple times. Like, this was very contentious with him. Like, I really regret that I'd never, like, I just don't know. I never had a chance to, like, really get good fences with Bob as far as being a friend. He was a tough person to love, tough person to be around sometimes. He could be one of the nicest people you ever met. And he could be real terrible to his friends. I miss that motherfucker so goddamn much. When he died, it was like this weird, because it's like we were fucking enemies, kind of, and hadn't talked and like hadn't hung out, and like we talked a little bit when we did the reunion, but he like we never had a chance to really reconnect, and I fucking deeply regret that. But it was just, fuck, man, he could just be hard. He could be a hard person to try to like make a brother. Anywho, he had split, and we were looking for drummers, and we tried a couple people out, and fucking Clyde, he was like, he was New Orleans dude, but he had like deep indie connections somehow, and I never really got to the bottom of that, because like when he moved up here, like he was kind of in and out. Like he would move, like he would be here for a while, and then he'd move out of state, and then we'd be doing something. He'd come back, and he'd be like crashing at a buddy's house. He was definitely kind of like a tumbleweed, man. But he became like a real close fucking treasured brother real quick. Like I fucking loved Clyde. He was fucking the man. Like funny as fuck. I loved his drumming. I loved that I think he got like that the just the slowness of it. The funny thing is that he thought himself to be like this ultimate rock and roll blues drummer kind of guy. But when that kind of simpatico hit, when we started rehearsing those songs for the Wretch, it was like you're the Doom drummer for this. You are the only person who could play the Wretch. Like nobody else could do that. Nobody else could do those songs. And the majority of them were mine. The Wretch, fucking Scourge of Drunkenness, Bastard's Born. And I was reasserting, like, because Jason had kind of run out of steam and we needed the follow-up record, and he and Clyde did not click. Like Jason very much wanted to, shit like Hymns of Blood and Thunder is what he wanted to do. He wanted to do these long and drawn out and there's a lot of movement and epic stuff. And it's just like, Clyde was like, no, man, this is how I do it. And it's just like, let's just do this. And my shit fit more into his drumming style. So it's like the balance of writing power had shifted away from Jason, which I was never against that. But when the change happened and we got a new drummer, and the fucking direction was like completely like there was doom, and then if you look at Hymns of Blood and Thunder, that's a heavy metal record. That's not a doom metal record. There's no doom on that. There's some slow songs, but there's nothing that I would like that would jump out to me as being like that's doom metal versus the Wretch, which I believe is like a doom metal album. Doom album. It's almost not. There's almost not even enough to recommend it as metal. It's just like doom in the sense of like fucking Saint Vitus. It's
Yeah,
just like which is like it's rock and roll. It's like it's just weird. It's hard to put a pin on, and really, you could spend your whole life trying to and argue for the rest of your life, and it's not worth it. But
definitely.
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, definitely. But then eventually you toured for a little bit, and then of course 2013 the band had broke up. So how hard was it to end the Gates of Slumber?
At the time, it was very easy. It was very, very easy. Like things were bad. Like everybody knows, about the things that were going on, and it was bad. It was very easy to end it, and I, fuck, man, you can sit there and try to replay shit in your head. What if I had done this? That's one of the worst things about me as a human being is that I will run autopsies on everything in my life is like constantly in my head, you know. We did get that Stormcrow thing out, and that I feel Stormcrow was the could have been if we hadn't been so wrapped up in drugs, all of us. If we hadn't been such fucking assholes, we could have had a new chapter that I feel could have been fucking triumphant. Not to fucking be all Bill and Ted about it, but it's like I feel like I listened to that recently just because like I hadn't, another person had asked about it, and I was like, I went back and listened. I was like, God, this shit was good, but we were so fucking lost, directionless. But Bob and I had finally started to connect a little bit, and then the drugs just kind of Jason couldn't keep it together. He needed help, and he had needed help for a long, long time. We all did, but he was really suffering. And yeah, I mean, you go back in time a million times. I sit there and it's like, I should have fucking ended the band a long time before that for his health and safety and for his family and for, my brother's life. You know, it I should have, you can shoot yourself to death though. What happens, what happens.
Yeah.
But I feel a lot of regrets about the way that all went. I tolerated shit, and it's like at the very end, like we ended in the summer of 2013, and we got an offer to support Church of Misery, and we were going to be direct support, and it was it was the gateway to basically being able to just be a band that's on the road instead of like guys that are like there were periods during this where I was working like 60 hours a week between 3 jobs. I don't know how I'm standing.
Yeah, you're a tough dude.
Well, a dummy in a lot of ways. But we did what we had to do to get going, and it's like fuck it's like at the perfect moment of shit. Like the band is at its worst, and we get this chance to be direct support for Church of Misery, and I'm like, we talked about it. Like it was the first time we talked in several months, and I was just like, look, I want to get together with you, and I have a list of things that if we're going to do this, we've got to follow everything on this list. And everybody agreed to it. And it was simple shit like we're going to rent rehearsal space, no phones at band practice, no beer at band practice, no weed at band practice, no, we are in band practice now. You're not going to be making a drug transaction on your phone while we're at band practice. On the road, there's no alcohol. Like we're going to kick all the booze off the rider. There's no weirdos hanging around. Like we're an insular unit, and we're going to play songs off of every record. Like I wrote the set list. I was like, this is non-negotiable. We're going to play all of these songs because this is the history of the band. It's like no band ignores their entire like back catalog, which we were very guilty of. If you saw us on tour, we would neglect albums and like throw things in the past, and it's just like it was just
Yeah.
fucking just so much dumb shit. Like we had a fucking video on MTV for fucking that Trapped in the Web. You know, it was got good airplay for a fucking month. A video that's fucking rare. We never played that fucking song again ever. It
Yeah.
was like nobody. I was just like, shouldn't we play the song that maybe somebody might have fucking heard or seen on TV? You know, God bless America. This is not
Yeah.
fucking.
But yeah, but then during like the breakup, you started up Wretch, which is named after the last at Gates of Slumber album. So how the idea of that band just come to be? Because it was only short lived for a little bit.
Considering that, so the beginnings of Wretch, considering the amount of drugs that everybody was doing when Clyde got fired from the band, I felt that he was railroad fucked out. And I started working on Wretch because I wanted to keep playing with him. Because I was, you know, we had, like, I enjoyed playing with Clyde. Like, and, you know, and Clyde had, by the time he was fucking fired from the band, the motherfucker had permanently relocated here. And I just felt like it was fucking wrong. And I was trying to mend fences with a buddy. And I was just like, this is what I'm going to do. Clyde eventually moved away. And, you know, by the time I was ready to really start working on Wretch, because it pretty much seamlessly flows from the end of Gates of Slumber into Wretch. We all had agreed to my terms. Everybody agreed. They're like, yeah, we're going to do this. And we agreed to fucking be on the tour. And I fucking booked out rehearsal space. And Jason blew us off. He relapsed and went to the hospital. And it was at that point in time, I was just like, this is done. You know, we reached, not a lot of people know this, but we reached, you know, booking agent was just like, well, man, you know, this is a thing. Maybe reach out to Reed from, you know, Wake. And he was in the Obsessed too. And see if he can do it. And he thought about it, but he just couldn't do it with his other commitments. And, you know, I never thought I'd ever ask anybody else to play bass in Gates of Slumber at that point in time. You know, it was just like, I never thought it. And when it didn't happen, it was just like, whatever, you know. I can't believe I even asked anybody to do it, you know. But yeah.
Yeah.
And that we lost one thing. I called Chris because Clyde had moved away, and Chris, like, you know, Chris is another person I've always had like a great musical chemistry with. Like, we're always able to lock in. Like, if I can lock in with a drummer, like I can lock in with Chuck, I can lock in with Chris, and I could lock in with Clyde. Bob, it was only at the very end that I felt like that there was any give on his end as far as like sensing what the other player, you know. I believe in a band that you should play to the strengths of the other players. Like, you should be reflexive in your playing, and like, okay, so like with Jason, very, very busy bass player, always wanted to be very busy, very melodic bass lines and stuff like that. Step back and give him room, you know, play to the drums, like just try to feel and fit in it with what's going on musically. And Chris and I were always able to do that very, very well, I think. So I had these songs that, and I just called him up, fucking played him the demo. He fucking loved it. I was just like, you know, initially what we were looking to do is something between like St. Vitus's, you know, V or 5, whichever the fuck it is, and fucking Master Reality is what is what I was looking for. And, you know, we started rehearsing, and we did the first demo, and we just like, I was just like, Chris, we're not going to get a fucking bass player, because another thing with Wretch is, so when I broke the Gates of Slumber up in the summer of 13, I quit drinking. I quit, you know, my fucking brand of narcotic. I quit that. Still smoked herb, but you know, I really cleaned myself up and gotten more in control. And like my goal for Wretch was to just record records. Like I was going to play the bass and Chris was going to drum. And my thought was is that eventually McCash and even you know I didn't want to get a bass player because whoever it was going to have the no explicitly like a personal like man to man, you to me. If McCash ever gets his shit together, you've lost your job.
Yeah.
Because I figured that the way that he was headed, he was going to fuck up everything in his fucking life and hit bottom. And when he fucking rebounded up, because he was my brother, I was going to be like, here's a bass guitar, here's an amplifier, here's a band, here's something to do. Don't like I didn't drink, I just played, and I would smoke herb before going to bed. I was living very, very straight, practicing guitar and like just doing that. And yeah, he died. And we got Bryce and we recorded the record, did some touring, and then it fell apart.
Yeah. And then in 2019, of course, the Gates of Slumber got back together. So what made you guys decide to come back?
So in 2018, I was my mom died in 2017, and I was caring for her with my dad. Basically, um, she died in the next room. Like I was not there. Jason's widow had come over with her youngest. No, actually, it wasn't her youngest. It was another. She was babysitting another friend's little girl, and she came over to check the day my mom died. And we were here in this room, and the little girl was like playing on my bass guitar, just banging on the strings, and we were just kind of visiting. And my dad comes in and lets me know that my mom had passed, and it was a long 2 to 3 day process. It was the worst fucking time of my life. And yeah, so like playing music at that point in time didn't mean shit to me. Didn't mean shit to me. Nothing meant shit to me. I tried to kill myself a few months later. I was really, remember I'd said earlier that there has been like several really deep, crushing depressions in my life, and that was one of them. And it definitely, Rich was a ping pong kind of band. Like there was a lot of internal drama in that band, and I'm probably as guilty of it as the next person. Bryce is probably the only person. It was me and Chris. It was a contentious relationship. Bryce was just fucking a great bass player and a beautiful person who was just there and like down to play and just fucking angel of a guy, just the best dude. Chris and I just couldn't fucking see eye to eye. And, when my mom passed, I just lost any ability to see like dealing with those arguments the same way anymore. I was just like scarred by, what the whole process of her death really fucked me up. And I just quit caring about much of the shit that I used to care about. And I'd gotten away from music and just started focusing on other things. It was a bad time. But that all came to an abrupt end. And it wasn't a bad time as far as like relapsing into narcotics. Like I was still working in the bar business and drinking too much. But I was exercising a lot. That was very important to me, and still is to the day. Like that changed very big in, in that period of my life. Like, losing like 50, 60 pounds was important to me at that time. And I was working out and I was just dealing with like my mother passing and like nothing in my life was working right. Bryce and I had reconnected, and there was a fledgling, like we were working with Dustin Bolges, who played in Skeleton Witch and Dreams Dead and several other bands. He was drumming for us actually, and we were like coming up with a different. It was it was us. It was a band of like three people playing tunes, and it was good. And we were using the Wretch name, but it really had very little to do with the stuff from the first record and what Wretch really kind of was. We maybe should have changed the name, but it's academic now.
Yeah.
But you know, that was kind of, it was just, nothing was from in 2017, 2018, it felt like I was just like unstable, and I was unstable. I was not, I need, what I needed to have happen is I needed to blow out my Achilles tendon while working out, and that had to be completely repaired. Like, I lost my right leg. It was gone. You know, no walkie, fucking, you know, big surgery, laid up in bed, no, no nothing, no, life ended. No, I couldn't work, no more bartending, no more going out getting drunk. All the fucking frilly extracurricular activities and stupid shit that I was up to ended at that time. And I just laid in bed and healed. And Chuck, who doesn't live too far from here, you know, he had Apostle of Solitude going, and we had long since, like, you know, made friends. Like, Wretch played several shows with Apostle of Solitude, and you know, it was good to have my friend back in my life 100%, like it had been in the old days. And you know, he was coming over checking in on me while I was healing from this stuff, and I was kind of getting my head right and had a chance to, you know, it's like God fucking literally was like, no, you're just gonna fucking sit here for 6 fucking months. You're gonna be bedridden, and you're gonna have to fucking, and you're not gonna be able to go and get a drink. You're not gonna be able to run around and be an asshole. You're gonna have to sit with the things in your fucking head, and you're gonna have to work it out. And Chuck's coming over, and you know, I get back up on my feet and start jamming with Wretch a little bit again, and you know, I'm still talking to Chuck, but in the healing process, well, I'm kind of, the Wretch thing came a few months later. Like, Wolf Mullman from Hell Over Hammerberg had been like emailing intermittently over the years, like basically trying to get Gates of Slumber to play Hell Over Hammerberg, and I'm like, no chance. Like, there is no Gates of Slumber anymore. I pitched Wretch to him, but you know, he wanted what he, you know, it's like he wanted that. He didn't want like a low card band, because that's what Wretch was. And you know, after one particular visit, you know, we'd been hanging out. It was like Wolf had emailed, and get back up on my feet a little, and I'm playing a little, and I'm able to get around and rehabbing the leg. And it dawns on me, I'm just like, you know, there's we could do a reunion thing. Like, we could play a show. There's absolutely no like, bands do it all the time. We could get together and just fucking fly over to Germany and have a long weekend, you know, and play a show and drink some German beer and see some friends, and you know, not fucking you know, be freaking out all the time, you know, like, kind of just have a little bit of fun with this instead of, you know, freaking out all the time. And it was around the same time as well that I was talking to Ollie from Church Within Records about doing the Gates of Slumber Alive record. We must have taken a wrong turn at Albuquerque. And yeah, it just kind of started to fall together, like, bit by bit. Like, yeah, we'll do the show. And you know, Steve kind of stepped right in, because Chuck and I had said, you know, because Wretch was the thing that I was very interested in, and of course Apostle of Solitude is very important to Chuck. So we weren't like, it's like, we're just going to do this as like a reunion thing. We're still going to definitely be doing other things. So, and we had agreed on the front end, it's like, there's no stress. And I was just like, you know, after Jason's passing, I quit like worrying and obsessing about a lot of shit. Like, and particularly, and even more after my mother's passing, I was just like, you know, some of the arguments and the shit that you've been through and you've done to yourself is completely fucking stupid and a waste of fucking time. Like, I don't argue at band practice anymore. It's just like, if somebody else has such strong feelings about something, they're probably right. You know, just go with it. Like, just go with it. It's like, you know, not every hill is to die on, and you can't control everything, and there's no fucking reason to try.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, all of a sudden and it was, here I am. Okay, so me and Chuck are playing music, and we're like trying to relearn these old songs, and relearning shit sucks because you're trying to remember exactly what you did so long ago, and I don't really even like it. I had to relearn it. I had to go back in time to a very old mindset and playing to like get my fingers under those songs again. And it's way easier to just come up with something new. All of a sudden it's just like, well, we got the live record, and I was like, we own the Awakening, and we own like a Plague on the Lamb, because we had actually talked with Church Within Records about reissuing those at that time. And I don't know what happened to Church Within. I've never heard from Ollie again. It was like the pandemic hit and he disappeared.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And then it was around then, of course, now we got the new self-titled Gates of Slumber album, which comes out on the 29th. And I've only heard like the two songs, Embrace the Lie and Full Moon Fever, and they're absolutely badass. So how was the recording process like for the new album?
very, very long and drawn out. Um, the first thing that we started working on was Full Moon Fever. Like that was something that popped out real quick in our recording process or writing process, the rehearsal process for the tour over there in 2020. And yeah, we basically worked on new material from about 2020 to about 2023. Now you have to remember, like 2020 and 2021 were like big lockdown years, and somebody gets COVID, and you can't be around them for 2 weeks, so it's like it's very difficult to, you have to remember, like we're a few years away from it now, but I still remember it's like, you know shit, man, when we got back, we came back as the just before the lockdowns happened. So get back, and immediately I'm on a 15-day quarantine because like we were running from COVID the whole time. Like borders closed the day we fucking got home. Um, it's weird to think about, but that did actually fucking happen. At least, unless it was a fever dream. Um, but yeah, like we just stymied by that, and a thing that we haven't really brought up yet is like after so my mom passed in 2017, and my dad's health started to decline not long after that, and that's been like the biggest thing since 2020. Like he was in the middle of COVID, he was hospitalized for about a month, and we almost lost him, and he's been very much dependent ever since then. So my life is very, very, very different from what it was prior to the pandemic. Like I'm happy that I have a buzzer in my pocket right now, and I'm glad we had such a nice conversation. But if it had beeped, I'd have had to, hey, you got to understand, I got to leave, because he's in the other room watching Archie Bunker or something.
Yeah.
I care 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
That's
And musically, did you want it to continue in the same vein as the retro, being as it has been like a long time since we had any new Gates of Slumber album? It's like a fresh new start for the band in a way.
yeah. The band is always, it was me and Chris and Brad, and then it was me and Chuck and Brad, and then it was me and Chuck and Jason, and then it was me and Jason and Chris, and it was me and Bob and Chris, and it was me and Clyde and Chris, and then or me and Bob, me and yeah, I'm fucking it all up. It's fucking ridiculous list of people who's been in this band over the years. Um, you know, um, Now it's a new one. Like playing with Chuck, it's very much going to have the same kind of feel. Like, and we draw distinctly. Like, when we did the reunion tour, like I know that there were people who were like, "What the fuck?" It's just like you guys are playing this ancient shit that hasn't been played in fucking almost 20 years. Because our first tour over there was 2015 years. 2005 we went over with Chuck, and it's like, here we are bringing all those old songs back, and people like we didn't. And we let everybody know it's like, no, we're not doing like Riders of Doom. We're not doing Iceworm. We're not doing fucking Doom of Akladema. We're not doing Chaos Calling. No, this is we're celebrating this reunion, and we're gonna, like, we've worked on those songs and we're gonna bring them back and do things with them, like the shit from like Suffer No Guilt and Conqueror and Hymns of Blood and Thunder. I'm gonna leave the Wretch album to itself. Like,
Yeah.
that to me is like, because that record was like, for me at least musically, because I was gonna fucking quit my own band around the time of Doom of Aquadema. I felt completely sidelined creatively in the band I started. I wasn't mad about it, but I was just like, that's one of the reasons why, like, I started to think about this Wretch thing, because I'm like, I got these ideas that I want to get out. There's these songs that I want to fucking play, and you know, you need other people to play them. But the Wretch is very special to me in that regard, and that's like a part. It's a transition in my life, because you notice lyrically it moves away from, like, Gates of Slumber songs are about things, and they have a particular feel to them that's a little bit more like, and I call it the Judas Priest element, that is mechanical and pounding. Whereas you can start to hear on the Wretch, because of Clyde's playing and then the way that Chris like played on the Wretch stuff, there's a lot more swing element to it, a lot more looseness, and a lot more like rock and roll. Like, it's kind of a doom rock thing. And also, those songs are not about things so much as they are about, my basically expressing my internal life a lot more, as lyrically speaking, feelings of regret, feelings of remorse, feelings of shame, feelings of loss, instead of like medieval torture and Conan the Barbarian. But when Gates of Slumber gets back together, and it's like, to do the band its own justice and to like respect it, and we had to pivot back. So it's like, that's why there's songs about werewolves and the fog and, the Black Plague and fucking battles and shit like that again.
Yeah.
It's you got to serve, the Gates of Slumber is like this entity, and you have to serve it. It's got to be respected, because, fucking a lot of my good friends put a lot of time into it. And it's like, I wouldn't want it to fit into Wretch Part 2, which is basically me processing life and writing about how I feel about some horrible shit that happened and experiences in my life, making it more about things and more timeless.
Yeah. Yeah. And being as this is, of course, like a self-titled album, because usually when a band does a self-titled album, it's always like their first album. But when it's like later in their career, I feel like that's like a change in it. So what was sort of like the reason for the album being self-titled?
We wanted to, it was a reset, it was a reset, because the typical thing is like, you name it after a song on, like, they're all there with the exception of Hymns of Blood and Thunder, which is basically just all those songs have, it's all like, I believe I'd worked the phrase Blood and Thunder into every song or some shit like that. I don't know. But we wanted to kind of, because it's a new chapter, Steve and the band writing and playing and singing, and we wanted to reset, just a hard reset. And we have everything in the past, and we're definitely going to carry that forward, but it's not bound by it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, with the release of the new album, what is there more to expect? Can we expect some like more singles or videos and stuff for the album?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's like, I'm down to try to do another video. I think they're gonna do one more single, and then it gets released. Unfortunately, because of like, my life situation, touring is out of the question at this time. We're already working on follow-up stuff. We're working on a split recording. Not too many details right now, but I can tell you that on it, it's our lowest tune stuff. We've actually moved down deeper in tuning, and we're bringing to life one of Jason's last written pieces from a project he was working on with Chuck while I was working um, on the beginnings of Wretch. So yeah, kind of taking some of his material and reworking it, and I'm excited about that. I think it's going to be cool.
Nice. So, thank you, Carl, for this conversation. It was great to be able to chat with you today. It's just anything else with the release of the self-titled album that we would also like to plug?
Uh, not. I can't think of anything I'd like to plug. I'd just like to thank everybody for, for checking out what we're doing. I'm sorry we won't see you on the road, but you know, eventually one day things change, and I hope that you guys still fucking care. Then I'm flattered that anybody remembers or gives a shit. It's fucking awesome. Thank you
Oh,
guys. All
hell yeah. So, everybody, Carl Simon from the Gates of Slumber, we'll see you next time.